What I wanted to do and still want to do is figure out why. It's the reason I read the book. Looking back, it's the reason I turned the page. And a lot of people watch shows, CSI will figure out in 45 minutes. I really don't care about the who. I'm not interested in whodunit, like a lot of people. Books and movies are written and made for that. I'm interested in why. I really believe understanding that is more important, quite frankly. Whodunit is not as complicated as people think. Murder is a crime of passion. 82% of the time, it's someone passionate about you. Well, there's not that many people passionate about you and I. So the circle is not super difficult to get down to. Why you did it is very complicated. And whether it's murder or robbery or burglary or drug use. And so if you think about that, the best place, the most fertile ground to go and understand why criminal acts occur is a jail.
Hi everyone, and welcome to Catalysts for Change, the show where we explore the stories, strategies, and turning points of leaders driving meaningful impact in their communities and across the country. I'm Adam Lister, and I'm so glad you're here. Today's guest has spent more than 2 decades leading one of the most complex public safety systems in the Southeast, and yet his approach has always been deeply human. Sheriff Daron Hall has served as the elected sheriff of Nashville-Davidson County since 2002. Over 6 terms in office, he's become a nationally respected voice in criminal justice reform, not by talking about it, but by doing it. Whether it's building a first-of-its-kind mental health treatment center next to the jail, reducing Nashville's incarcerated population by more than 30%, or helping thousands avoid jail time altogether through license diversion and reentry programs, Sheriff Hall is proving that compassionate leadership and public safety can go hand in hand. In today's episode, we'll talk about what shifted his thinking about incarceration, the people who keep him inspired, and what it takes to lead systems that are long overdue for change. Let's dive in. Sheriff Hall, thank you for being here today. It's good to see you.
Good to see you, Adam.
You have served in law enforcement for over 35 years and have been elected sheriff 6 times. I'd love to start, though, at the beginning. What was it that originally called you to this work, criminal justice, law enforcement?
Yeah, so I grew up right out here in Nashville by the airport. My parents, a little street called Luna Drive, and there wasn't a whole lot going on in life. And I wasn't a kid who read a lot, but when I was 16 years old, I read the book Helter Skelter. And to be honest, I can't even explain why I ever picked it up, because I wasn't that kid. I wasn't a reader. It wasn't a school project. But I can tell you, looking back now, that as I turn those pages to want to see what's on the other page, and of course for your listeners, that's the Charles Manson murders, but in the late 60s and early 70s. And I wasn't really that interested kid either. I was just stumbled, and I read through page after page, and now I can diagnose that as probably fear. That was, wow, this 5'2" man was motivating basically innocent girls and a few men to murder people in the end. And there was a lot of other things that went on. But I think looking back, the interest I had was not whodunit. And this is important. This is what I have learned about me, is I was interested in why. And so I'd flip the page, and these people who were savagely murdered and things that were going on, and how would you do that, and why would you do it? I mean, that sounds idealistic, but so at 16, I read this book. And so if you coincide reading that book and being in high school, I went to Antioch High School. I was not a super interested kid. I was not a very good student in that way. And I had some fortune that allowed me to go to college. No one in my family had ever been to college. No one I knew had ever been to college. I had an opportunity to play college football, and so that's what lured me to see Kool and the Gang, God forbid, in Bowling Green, Kentucky. So I end up there and thought, well, this is a really cool environment, and I go to play sports, and they had tickets to this concert. But soon, as we all know, into the experience of walking onto a college campus, whether it was the football coaches or the school said, "What's your major?" And I said, "What does that mean?" I had no idea what that meant. And so I said, "Well, what are you going to study?" And so, as we all have to do, you have to try to sharpen your pencil a little bit and figure out, what do I want to go do? And as a young, 18, 19-year-old kid, I related to this one thing: I like to read. And it was a bizarre thing because as we all know, the regular educational program was in place, but so criminology, believe it or not, was the term at Western Kentucky. We did not have a criminal justice program. It was based out of the sociology division of the school. So that's what I signed up for. And I found myself struggling through classes except for what I like to read about. And I say struggling, just living life and doing what I was doing. But I was interested in going to class for this thing called criminology. So that led me, believe it or not, for a kid who barely really wanted to be in high school to going back to grad school in what was criminology. And so in all of that experience, what I can tell you is in school, and I leave school for a year to go be an intern, and I interned in the jails in Kentucky. I had 7 jails. I lived in a hotel and traveled in every jail when someone was arrested. They do not have bail bondsmen in Kentucky. It's a state law. It's a state-funded program that goes in and interviews people who are arrested and notifies the court of their risk. So that was this job of this 20-year-old college student. Loved it. So I had that year, some school, some education, and said, man, this is all I ever want to go do. And what I wanted to do and still want to do is figure out why. It's the reason I read the book. Looking back, it's the reason I turned the page. And a lot of people watch shows, CSI will figure out in 45 minutes. I really don't care about the who. I'm not interested in whodunit, like a lot of people. Books and movies are written and made for that. I'm interested in why. I really believe understanding that is more important, quite frankly. Whodunit is not as complicated as people think. I mean, murder is a crime of passion. 82% of the time, it's someone passionate about you. Well, there's not that many people passionate about you and I. So the circle is not super difficult to get down to. Why you did it's very complicated. And whether it's murder or robbery or burglary or drug use. And so if you think about that, the best place, the most fertile ground to go and understand why criminal acts occur is a jail.
Field study.
It is. And I can't tell you at 19 I had this mapped out. That's not true at all. But if you're hungry for that information, I'm 20 years old, going in a jail at 6:30 in the morning, interviewing you to give the judge information to help decide what your bond might or might not be. So I'm asking you all the questions I really wanted to know. I didn't create it, but it was like, so where are you from? How long have you lived there? Do you have a job? And it started to develop what I believe is the why. Nearly 40 years later, I can tell you why most people commit crime. I can tell you why most things occur. And I'm not saying I'm an expert in a, psychologist perspective, but the data surely is clear. That's the first bite, Adam. The next part is, what are you going to do about it? And society is not comfortable with what are you going to do about it. They're comfortable with taking away the problem. Right? The blue lights do that, and we remove the person from the street. But society is going to have to get comfortable with what does that really mean. That's the beginning of solving the problem. And I think law enforcement is unfortunately viewed in one lens, and that is catching people. Really what it's about is arresting the problem. Mm-hmm. And it's complicated, and I've spent most of my life trying to arrest the problem, not the person.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting reflection because I think about it. It's an honest assessment for a lot of different industries, whether you are in home sales or politics or consulting, whatever the case may be. I think that often you get folks that are looking for the easiest to understand answer or solution to a nuanced and complex problem. And we see it on the news on a regular basis. It comes up in a lot of conversations that I have. I think one of the best books that I ever read that kind of gets to that point is Freakonomics. Yeah. And because it masquerades as a book about economic conditions, but it really peels back people's incentives. And I think if you can start to understand incentives and what leads people to have certain incentives, whether it is positive or negative, then you can start to understand kind of why they're doing the things they're doing. And it gives you an opportunity if you want to advance those in a positive way, or to your point, arrest those problems to get ahead of those. Yep. Most of us know someone, and I think you were beginning to hint at some of this a little bit, but most of us know someone who has struggled with mental health or addiction. And as sheriff, I know you've seen firsthand when those problems collide with the criminal justice system. these experiences, and you talk about arresting the problem, have led you to innovate in an industry that isn't winning awards for innovation. It's not regularly considered to be a kind of a progressive industry. I'd love to talk a little bit about the creation of the behavioral care center, and what was the tipping point when it became clear to you that Nashville didn't need another jail, but it fundamentally needed something different?
Wow, this is really good. Keep in mind, a lot of people confuse this, but sheriffs house people. Police chiefs don't, and I'm just using that. Most people confuse the roles. In a lot of communities, sheriffs have a variety of jobs, but it's important to know that in almost every community in the country, the person who is housing the arrested person, other than the Department of Corrections, once you're, say, convicted, is in the custody of a sheriff. And what that really means is you live with that person. And I say this all the time, but a police officer's really engagement with the individual is just minutes most of the time. A lawyer's time, I know this sounds offensive, but is maybe hours, but not a ton. Judges, minutes. DA's, minutes. And I'm talking about that whole process. We spend years living with that person awaiting trial, and in some cases living with them after. And so looking back, I think the reason that the world of mental health became so almost offensive to me was I'm seeing this every day. My staff live in it every day for many, many, many years. And as naive as it sounds, I assumed that the arrest, which was valid, I think it was, the reason, there was a crime of indecent exposure, sure, and there is a...
They've been adjudicated.
Right. So all of that feels to me, like legal, and it feels, what do you want to call it, acceptable in society, and, So I think I was complacent. I think I lived in the world that society says that the naked person needs to be taken off the street, and that person needs to be taken off the street because indecent exposure is a charge, and the charge means you go to a place called the jail. I run the jail. I'll take you to court, and the court will, adjudicate the case. But I also saw kind of a crisis in the works, and not even really knowing it. Suicides in jails are somewhat common, or at least attempted suicide. There's a lot of overdose situations. There's also other psychotic episodes that the human being never sees. A person diving off of a bunk into a metal toilet to try to drown themselves. Most people will never see. My staff see mutilation on a regular basis. And so as all of that became, this is over 10 or 12 years ago, became kind of this growing crisis. I remember years back, even a man named Geraldo came and did a show in Nashville called Back to Bedlam. And that show was really about people who had around the country, but Nashville was, and I was the chief deputy, I think, at the time. But that show was about mental health in jails, and almost a sensational, we were trying not to make it that, but a sensational view at how people are being taken off the street, not in a positive way, but the sensation was, oh my God, these folks are very sick. In Nashville, like other communities, started something called a mental health court. It became a specialty court. I believe Judge Mark Fishburne was the judge who led that. They eventually go to the White House, one of the first in the country. And it was kind of set up to handle cases of arrested people with mental health crisis. If you'll let that be 1996, 7 or 8, somewhere in that time frame, as that came out of the ground, the guy I was the chief deputy, I'm running the jails day to day. What I began to do, looking back, is to start to feel like it was handling our mental health crisis, this court. And the court was supposed to take the arrest and the diagnosis and work through what's his best treatment plan and somewhat treat that in the court system. So that had been in Nashville for many years. It kind of gave me this false sense of it's working. And I'm not saying it isn't, but I'm just saying that's our solution. If you'd asked me on the street 10 years ago, I would have raised my right hand and said, we have a mental health court in Nashville and we run really safe and secure jails and blah, blah, blah. But I started to realize that the crisis that we were dealing with day in, day out in the mental health space, we're not really being treated, not because the court wouldn't do it. It's because the volume is far more than a court can handle. The diagnosis that we're experiencing are far more severe than used to be. And the court had a select way of choosing people that fit the court model.
I'm also hearing your original thesis showing up here in that mental health court is only spending minutes with
right.
that person as well.
Right. And it became a turnstile. It's not their fault. It's a high volume business of courts. And I'm living in the jails. Our staff are living in the jails, and I'm frustrated, quite frankly, not knowing what to do. We had multiple mayors, multiple chiefs of police during these years, and I would hear ideas of, let's have a co-response model. That's something Memphis was doing 30 years ago, where we'd send people out with the police. You now hear about this today, but this was 30 years ago as an idea. And I kept thinking, well, maybe they'll solve it. Maybe that individual will no longer be coming here. And I saw those ideas die on the vine. I so happened to be, in 2013, I was the president of the American Correctional Association. I was proud to do that. You're elected by your peers as the only sheriff to ever do that. And in the country, what usually it is a commissioner of corrections, because corrections is typically thought of in a state prison system. Far more people are in jails and prisons. And so I have never been able to get people to see the difference. A jail and a prison are compared to, saying, an emergency room and a nursing home. They are not the same operation. And emergency rooms, if you can imagine, is a high volume, high intensity. Nursing homes are in control of time, and prisons basically live that way. So here I am. I'm the president of the American Correctional Association. I'm trying to move the needle in my own way and through the corrections world. And we did some good things of getting the light shined on jails within the corrections world. But as a perk of 2 years of this presidency, the one thing you do is you travel one time a year internationally to represent the United States as the president of our association. And I thought that was cool. I'd never been to Europe at the time. And I remember they kind of gave me the landscape of this international conference. Every country is going to be represented. You're going to wear the translation devices, and we're sitting there. And so if I'm honest with you, I'm from Antioch, and to get to walk over and say I'm from the United States of America, I thought that was going to be the coolest thing. And on the plane on the way over there, I was like, man, I hope I don't screw this up. And so I worked through this deal. My name is Daron. I'm the president of the American Correctional Association. I'm representing the United States of America. Man, that just felt so cool. And I had spent my lifetime to that point in this line of work, and I had seen the needle move to improving constitutionality of jails and how we manage them, and I, not just here, but in the country. The 80s were horrific. The 90s and 2000s, it got better. So to be honest, I'm feeling like the needle's moving in the country, but I'm representing the United States, and here we are. And sure enough, it goes around the room, and it comes my turn. I stand up. I did not blunder. I was proud of myself. I thought the country was standing, represented, whatever that means. And I felt the room. I've often compared it to having your zipper down. They knew something I didn't. It kind of gave them a weird look at me. It was not outwardly laughing, but it felt smirkish. I spent 3 or 4 days in Belgium, which is where we were, and I learned what it was about. We over-incarcerate people. I've heard this all my life. I worked in a prison system in Australia for a year. We had more people in the state of Tennessee's prison system than the entire country of Australia. I mean, I've heard that and known that all my life, that we incarcerate at a higher level. What most people in this country would not know is that we focus on things sometimes that are very exciting, but they're not really the root of the problem. Race is a great example. Today in Nashville, 50% of the people arrested are going to be white. 50%. Nashville's 58% white. That does not mean that it's proportionally perfect. But that subject gets far more attention when we start talking about the messed up system of a criminal justice system, and it takes off, and people either shut it down in their mind for reasons, or it takes a life of its own and we lose sight of what's going on. For example, just to give you one more, 50% of the people are white that are booked today, but tomorrow morning, there are more white people percentage-wise released on alternative programming than those of color. So there is a problem, but it's not necessarily arrest. You see what so all of this stuff, and I'm sitting in Belgium, and when you talk to other countries, none of them say that you over-incarcerate people and understand why. What they say is, why do you take so many people to jail in your country? We would never do that, and we are whoever I'm talking to. And when you start analyzing who they don't incarcerate, it's really not racially driven at all. It's about things like mental health. There's not another modern country in the world that would arrest a naked man in Centennial Park today. No other modern country. So if you, in any other country in the world, called in and whatever the device is in that country to say, hey, I need something, Number one, you and your kids need the naked man out of the park. We all agree on that. We're the only country in the world that solves that problem with a criminal act. And so the reason that we are laughed at, and no one really knows this, but the reason that we're laughed at and smirked at and kind of pointed at is because 35% of the people in this country, in Nashville, that go to jail are taken off the streets for what we consider to be a crime. Also, or in most cases, the underlying issue is a mental health crisis. And so what does that mean? Well, in other countries, when you call in and say, I need something, that assessment of what the need is based on behavior and the conduct and so forth. In our country in the 60s, mid-60s, when President Kennedy was the president, the idea was we were going to tear down mental health hospitals and institutions because they stigmatized people negatively. And we're going to rebuild a community mental health system that wouldn't be these large hospitals that make it look like, hey, that's a bad place. Instead, let's build these community centers that are mental health driven. And you and I would have loved ones. If we needed to, we could take them to the community center. I've often compared it to the Walgreens of today. I think that was the vision one day, if you needed help. And then obviously beds would have been available. So in this 62, 63, our country decides at the leadership of President Kennedy to tear down the hospitals. And we did that. And we built back over the next 50 years an institution called jails. In this town right here, I was born and raised right from where I lived when I was growing up. Central State Hospital sit on the corner of Donaldson Pike and Murfreesboro Road. It was a huge institution. It was a state mental health hospital. Just like our country, we tore that hospital down, and today that's Dell Computer. But what people don't know is 2 miles from Dell Computer, the exact number of beds that we tore down that were hospital, I now operate, they're called jail beds, and they're on Harding Place. There's 3,000 of them. Every place in this country did that. So what happened is when we said we were going to build a system, we did. And by the way, the Vietnam War intercepted the funding, and it's just never, ever been addressed. And so what ends up happening is it became sexy to fund law enforcement and courts and punitive and punishment. And we've done that now for 50 plus years. So I hear that and this kind of snickering, and they don't say it exactly the way I'm telling you. I went and did a lot of research when I came home. What in the world are we doing? How do we ever get here? Why is the naked man with me? I had viewed it as indecent exposure. They view it as a mental health crisis, and they're treating it in a place that's not a jail that's much more effective at doing it. So I got way deep and way busy into going, wow, we're weird as a country. What are we going to do about it? So I gathered what I thought were the experts. I thought I was an expert too. What does that mean? I'm in this job, the chief of police, the DA, the public defender, the mental health judge, the state director of mental health, and sit around the table. And then the government, if you buy lunch, they'll come. And so I bought lunch multiple times and said, look, will you work with me to help diagnose this whole system problem? They live with me. They're coming to your courtroom. They're in the backseat of your car, but I live with them. I need your help. So the first thing we did was I just wanted to know how lost I was. And I said, naked man in the park, how does it work? And when we went around the room, it was this specific. We've often heard silos. No more conversation I've ever had that was more siloed. The chief of police, who was a friend of mine, could not tell you sitting there what happened before the police car arrived or what happened after. It was, we pull up, it's indecent exposure, he's in a car, we drop him off at booking, bingo. And the judge could defend when they come in here.
It's the hospital equivalent of a triage.
It is. And what was also a little offensive is, keep in mind, the police take a lot in this country, a lot of heat for the way they respond. And I'm talking about to a mental health crisis. When you pull up on the scene, most of them, especially at this time, had very little training in the world of mental health. It's response and physical response and techniques. But the public are who make that phone call, right? They see abnormal behavior. And so when they arrive, the police are treating it as behavior. And those two things clash. So, and by the way, clashes in my system too, because when you arrive in jail, everyone doesn't just straighten up. I mean, there's still a lot of that that's very difficult to manage. But what was very fascinating and almost depressing is in the room, as we went through weeks after weeks, eventually for 2 years, I learned that none of us knew what we were doing. And I'm talking about, here's a great example. I said, I did not know the answers, but I would say, what are the charges that most mentally ill people come to jail for? What is that caveat? What is the thing that's doing it? And we went around the room and everybody had an idea. Everybody had something. I mean, someone said resisting arrest. Someone said public intoxication. And they're all on a list of the top 10. But the number one, 2 of the top 3 reasons people who are mentally ill come to jail are not even new crimes. What it is asking them to do something they were never going to accomplish. A court date. They're not coming to court. If you're off your medication for 6 months and you don't even know to put on clothes to go to the park, you're not going to know to go to court. The other thing, probation violation. So that means you put on probation at one point, which you never should have been because you're not going to make probation. Most people find it very difficult to make probation anyway. It requires you to keep a job, drive around town, park, pay fees, urine test, things that people who are in a mental health crisis or their lifetime, it's not appropriate to put that person on a program called probation that was designed in the 60s, by the way, very complicated, difficult system. So you see them failing programs. And so after we would spend these weeks and weeks, and I was like, why are we doing that? It took me a long time to get the data. I went down into the probation data to determine what percentage of people who are mentally ill are successful on probation. 9%. 9% of people who you and I have said through an assessment are mentally ill are being paraded into a courtroom, raising their right hand, and judges and people are saying, do you plead guilty? Yeah, I'll take probation. And so this took years. And all of that data starts to point to, we didn't know what we were doing, number one. Number two, we're creating our own problems by programs that, like I said, that they weren't going to be successful on. I kept reminding everybody, we're the only country who do this. I don't have the solution, but we've got to all admit this is not working. And I see it in a different way than they do because I live with the person. We're the one, transporting people to hospitals who've been cutting on them. So all the stuff that we live with. So as this journey took off, I wanted to be able to present to them something that would help. So I kept asking, well, when the police pull up to the naked man in Centennial Park, are they arresting him for being naked? And the answer, it sounds simple. It's not that way. What happens is oftentimes they have a warrant. They run Daron Hall's name when they pull up. I'm naked as a jaybird. I'm standing in the park. That is a crime. But what you would find interesting is oftentimes I have a warrant already. You know what it's for? Failing to appear or probation violation. So they have no discretion. You must make that arrest. There are discretionary arrests. So I found that interesting. I was like, wait a minute. So we created this system where these warrants are stocked up on people who are hardly ever going to be successful in the criminal justice system. And we're waiting on the next time we bump into them to lodge that charge, bring them to a system, take them back into a court, have another date. And it's just a cycle. At this time, I asked everybody in the room, I did not have the answer. What do you believe the percentage of people who are mentally ill that are entering our doors in my jail that I take to court every day, what percentage of them are ending up in that court we designed 25 years ago that's doing great work? And by all accounts, it's doing great work. What percentage of the mentally ill people are getting in the right court? So we went around the room. I do this to everybody. I like to do this to see how naive we are. My guess was 75%. I was the lowest number of all the guesses. It's 5%. 5% of the people who are diagnosed and flagged are ending up in the lane of a courtroom where the judge and her staff are educated and understand the remedies that would help and so forth for a case. The other 10 judges know very little about mental health. They're doing the cases they should. They went to law school, they're judges, they're elected, but their passion probably is not mental health. Their staff don't have that expertise. So that tells me of the people I'm taking over there, it's not anybody's fault, but we're being very selective in who gets in this court, and these other ones are dealing with these people, putting them on programs they're never going to be successful with. So after all of that, a couple of years and all, the timing was brewing that I knew we were going to have to build a new facility. These things were not tied together, but in my life it was, because I'm about to build a new complex downtown, and that's political, as you can imagine. We're trying to negotiate what we needed and so forth. And I just, to be honest with you, my dad was in the city council when I was growing up. I've worked with the council for years. There's been plenty of mayors. I've worked well with some and not so with others. But my point is, I didn't have the energy at this stage of my life to go over there and educate them on this grand idea. I didn't. Because quite frankly, no one had done what I was thinking we might try to do. There wasn't a roadmap of how to do it. There wasn't proof it was going to work. And as you well know, from a media, the political, everything, it's very hard. So what I did was I went to them and said, I need to replace what we have. And what that is a building in a downtown area. It is our detention center. It has 800 beds in it. It's complex. They're expensive. The numbers turned out to be somewhere in the $200 million range. So in a nutshell, I just told them I'm going to replace the building, which is true. I told them I needed what it would cost to do that, which was true. But once the money was approved, I got with the contractors and the architects and my team and said, we're going to build what we think we need. Not with more money. I didn't go back and say, I just said, let me replace what we've had with what we need. So we built 2 buildings instead of 1, and those 2 buildings sit side by side. And the idea was, as you bring that person from the streets, the why, as I used to say, we want to know why. And if that why is a mental health acuity level that can be treated, and what that really means is some are too homicidal, suicidal at the moment to be treated. But if your acuity level qualifies and your charges qualify, it started as misdemeanor only. Today it doesn't matter. So that's a very open-ended, the DA is involved with that. And the individual agrees to do it. By law, they have to agree. Very complicated. Those 3 things are met. You're taken out of what you would call a booking room. You're not booked and processed and taken to court. You're handed off to the mental health program, which is called the Behavioral Care Center. The co-op, mental health co-op in Nashville, is contracted to provide the clinical care. My staff oversee what you would call the security. We call it technicians. It's a team-oriented.
They're wearing scrubs, not uniforms.
Right. And it's a much more of a team atmosphere. Yeah. And there's not officers there. They're not inmates there. We tried to change the entire outlook of the way the building is perceived. If you want to pick your loved one up today from the BCC, you pull in, walk in a glass door and say hello and sit right down where the person is. If your loved one's in jail, which is in every other community in this country, you have to go through you don't get to go to jail to go back in. You may be behind a glass wall. But we wanted to remove everything. Adam, keep in mind, in the 60s, what we promised people was that the institutions stigmatized people who were mentally ill. So let's tear them down. What we do now is double stigmatize. We say you're criminal and mentally ill. So my goal was to decriminalize it. What does that mean? When they arrive here, the naked man is naked because he's off his medication and needs to be stabilized from a mental health perspective. And quite frankly, the courts need to do 0 with that case because it's really not a criminal act in the sense of what's the root cause. If you dream with me and it works, and if you dream with me that I could go back to Belgium, I don't think they would laugh at the next person, because if it works, the 35%, if that's the number of people that would be in places where they belong instead of jail systems, we wouldn't be over incarcerating people to the level that any other country is. And so it's been a long road. It's that whole thing was just trying to educate myself. Systems like this aren't easy to change. And I wish I could tell you everybody was along for the ride. I mean, I won't ever forget, I didn't tell a soul what I was trying to do until at one point I said, pour the damn concrete. And what I meant was, once that concrete starts, I can shame you into helping me. And these are friends. These are not enemies. And so what the DA has all the authority in the world to not prosecute you for the charges that we wanted to treat as a mental health case. If I don't have your help, I can't just wave a wand. So I jokingly told him, I said, the concrete's pouring. Surely you're not going to let me and you and the taxpayers look really stupid. That building is available to do really good things. I need your creativity and helping me come up with a way to divert these cases.
Well, I think to that end, and I think you're hitting on something that I think is really interesting, particularly when you're at the intersection of both policy and law and then culture, is that changing the policy is one thing. Changing the culture is inside a jail, inside the public mindset, is something entirely different. And knowing when and how to gauge both the temperature for policy change and then the threshold for change in the culture is different. I think about, you were talking about bringing people in for various crimes. Grew up watching the Andy Griffith Show, where the town drunk literally walks into the jail and then walks right back out. So I mean, the idea that was part of the culture, that was where you effectively rehabilitated from whatever the thing was that put you incongruent with society's expectations, takes a lot of effort. I'd be curious to think about how, or what you think was most effective, because you've done it in a couple of different ways. From my perspective, you've done it on the policy making side, and then just kind of some raw political levers. And then you've also had some celebrity endorsements of these policies and got some kind of national attention where folks are looking at Nashville as a model. How did those kind of materially stack onto each other? And then to your other point, I think sometimes there's lessons in politics about how to leverage influence and how to encourage participation as you're trying to get something, even when folks may be less inclined to be enthusiastic about the idea.
It's kind of funny. I don't get asked this kind of question very often, but one of the things that's always interesting to me, I've always had a pretty good relationship with the chiefs of police. I forgot how many, 4 or 5 since I've been in this job. And one of the interesting kind of fun conversations with the chief of police is that you're appointed by a mayor. You're working for a government at the election of someone else who has a policy or a philosophy that you may or may not even know.
And you're an executive.
Right. And that's a complicated arrangement. And we've often said privately that the difference between myself and you is I know when I'm running, right? I know the election's coming and it's a process. In that world, it's difficult because you don't know who the person sometimes is going to be. And the policies of that mayor shifting down from the community or whatever, the accountability of the police chief through the mayor is the reason we have a COB, which I don't agree with. I don't think we should have a COB. I don't love the accountability going through some other body. But I do believe in accountability, but I can tell you this, I'm accountable every day. I get people calling my house and my office and they will tell me, I pay you, I'm your boss. And I think that's fair. I have to live and worry about that in my daily life, just like your boss or your boss. I mean, and the police chief has a unique relationship because of where it sits. And we've debated for years who has it better. And I'm talking about, I don't have a boss that's trying to dictate what I do. In some cases, there have been police chiefs who haven't loved the way that they were being told to police by mayors. I don't have that. And it allows this position some autonomy. It allows you to be able to try to, and I don't want to say listen to the community, but I try hard to do that. And the pressures of how people are being treated in jails and all that may not be an obvious thing the community is screaming about, but in part it's because jails and my systems are very dark, very hard to shine the light on. And so one of the things that I like is I didn't have to go to a mayor or a support system, and I'm talking about to get approval, but I surely have to face these folks going forward, whether that's the council or the community. And so the timing was important. I'd been in the job a long time. DA was brand new. Glenn Funk, we had a brand new mental health judge. We had brand new mayors, brand new police chiefs. And I had been, at a pretty young age, I was the senior member of the group, not even knowing that. I couldn't have said this right 20 years ago. So I think I was in a decent place. The experience in Belgium really kind of shaped me differently and rocked me going, wait a minute, I thought constitutionality of making sure we do right things. And looking back, that was a shift for me. But I also had the ability to say, this is what I want to do, and eventually have to run, put my name on the ballot and say, I want to help people. I want to get people out of the system. What I wasn't ready for, to be honest with you, is the DNR politics in our country. I mean, I don't even know how to tell you how far those things have swung. And I don't mean just now. I mean, when I got in, we've gone through 3 strikes you're out. We went through, probably overdid it in some criminal justice reform efforts that need to swing. And I'm not even talking about who we've elected. I'm just talking about the movement of that. I mean, 25, 30 years ago, you couldn't have a mental health and an addiction conversation in the same room. I remember where if you're going to be in treatment, you couldn't be on any medication.
Yeah.
What? Looking back, and that was just so we've moved the needle. The people's controversial. I actually think the opioid crisis helped us understand drug use. It didn't help the country. But everybody I know, including you, have had someone who was addicted to something that we didn't even think was really a drug. We didn't know heroin's in pain medicine. We didn't call it that. My son is he's 32 today, he's 20-something years old, had shoulder surgery. We had 84 pain pills. And he was directed, I'm standing there, he was directed to take them at night when he sleeps and when he goes to physical therapy. We're not doing that. And I'm not an expert, but our country's moved away from that. We've learned, we've lived through it. But what that did do was it allowed us to all understand that addiction is a disease first, and we're all suspect to it. And I think whether you're D or R, or whether you're liberal, I don't care. We all have seen that and the horrific impact that's had. And so when you're seeing people who are struggling with heroin or drugs going to jail, it's easier today to have a conversation. That person needs to be, clean and offered opportunity to change their life and then go back into society, just like your brother-in-law or your sister-in-law or whoever in your family that was addicted that may have overdosed or whatever. And I don't think we were there ever before. Right. People thought drugs were done behind the dumpster on a bad street. No, heroin's in every house in this, or has been in every house in this town. It's called a doctor prescribing it for a purpose. I'm not against it. I'm just saying we have to be fair. The likelihood you can become addicted to that, removal of a wisdom tooth is the same thing as the backseat of a car, smoking heroin. So that shifted us a little bit. And society moved to, I think, accept it a little differently, that it is a disease. It's not just something to quit.
Right.
You would never say that to cancer patients. And so our country has moved, whether you're D or R, and all of that helps some when you're talking about getting funding to do things. Mental health became a big deal for me, as I explained earlier. And to be honest with you, Adam, I couldn't get people to even talk about that back then. And I'm not saying I was right. I'm saying the people were out of sight, out of mind. The naked man is off the streets. The society really doesn't see what goes on and doesn't know. And as you experience and go through and talk about it, people had alternatives and ideas to come up with, but no one ever followed through with it. I was fortunate because I could take this money and divide it almost on the scene. And I took a gamble I didn't lie, but I did not tell them what my plans were. I just said, give me the money that the city would be spending anyway. Let me take that money and repurpose it for what I think is a better way to deal with this problem.
My favorite term in politics is to modernize.
Modernize. And don't forget the other awkward part for me, at the same time was this conversation about defund the police, which is a silly argument. I understand, and philosophically I agree, we need to repurpose the money. It doesn't need to be in jails and courts and police cars. But you're going to have to invest a significant amount of our money and do what in the 60s we said we were going to do. And I'm all for it. But the argument of politics back then was saying, let's defund. And I was in a weird time because I'm trying to take my own budget and really move it into a mental health system. And we did that budgetarily and we operated that way. And so it was a unique situation. But I do think that's down in the weeds, nerdy Daron who cares about and watches jails and courts and all that. There were other things happening that were, I'm a sucker for redemption. My son graduated from high school and the commencement speaker was a guy named Tom Douglas. Tom Douglas is the top songwriter in the country, I think. His son so happened to be in the class. And so he was this commencement speaker and he talked about his own life and struggles with alcohol and other things. And it was all about these young men and women who are graduating and doing their thing and how they're going to live. And it was just talking about making mistakes and accepting it and turning your lives around. And man, I fell in love with what he said, and because it applied to my son, although I didn't listen to my commencement speaker probably when I graduated. So I doubt that they took it all, but I sure did. Yeah. I came home and I had it recorded. I took it to work. It was the most powerful thing. And before long, I have asked him to come in and work with guys who are in jail, not to write commercial music, but to get them to deal with their life choices that a lot of times, especially men, aren't comfortable talking about the night they carjack somebody or what they're doing. So we started with that. And along the way, what I have learned is there are people, especially in the world of music, I'm a big music fan, but of music where they're telling their stories. A lot of these folks have a broken life too. And these are the Tom Douglases. I could name many others. We've had, I think Steve Earle got sober in our jail. Kid Rock has a song about being in this jail. The point I'm making, and not sensationalizing it, some of it's deep, dark stuff. So that was all, like I said, sucker for redemption, music. We're trying to change the situation. And I have a 24-year-old son as well, and he's a big music young man. And, he sends me music. He's 17 or 18 years old. He sends me music all the time. And hey, Dad, listen to this, listen. And I always do it. And I like meaningful lyrics. I don't know who can sing and who can, or who can play and who can't. I can tell you who can write. I love to hear the story and believe that that's a story that's impactful. And so he sent me this story, this guy named Jelly Roll. Now, understand, not one soul in this town knew who that was, and including me. And he sent me some pretty graphic and not radio play type of music, but it was not glorified. It was dark. And that darkness was about him, and it never made it commercially, but his story was very powerful in the lyrics.
And familiar to a lot of people.
Yeah, right. And when I heard it, and by the way, at the time I'd never seen him. And so when I heard it, my son knew I would like, and I can tell you the name of it. It can't make a FCC approval. Just the name of the song was offensive. But what it really was about was, I can't shake this label that I have. And what he was really talking about in a song that never made it big was, even when he tries to do the right thing, whatever that was in his life, he's still viewed as the same. And so that was kind of powerful to me. And so anyway, somehow or another, I stumbled across the guy who wrote the song, and I listened to it, and I stumbled across looking at him, and I went, oh my God. I mean, the first time I'd ever seen this person, I was like, oh my God. So I knew that a song or two, and the next thing I know, I'm down a rabbit hole one night, and I stumbled across that same strange looking person at the time, and the name is unique, and he was on some podcast of no celebrity, and I just sat and listened to it because I thought that song was important. And in that, believe it or not, in that podcast, he talks about where his life changed. He said, my life changed on May the 14th, 2009 on Harding Place at a facility I was doing time. An officer knocked on the door and told me I had a daughter last night. Well, that facility is a facility I opened and we managed for years. And we, although at this moment it was vacant, I'm very, very familiar with it. I did not know he was in the facility. I did not know his life ever changed around. I did not know he was from Nashville. And he goes on talking, he was from Antioch. I was born and raised in Antioch. So there was this interesting alignment with this strange looking guy that I thought was, fascinating. But now that he has a story inside, man, that starts to be at least interesting to me. So life goes on a little bit, and it's been 3 or 4 months later. Our chief of staff, who's actually here today, been with me for 30 years. And part of her job, we have a lot of requests. We have a lot of requests from the media and documentaries and all sorts of things over the years, and stuff that we're not interested in at all, very sensationalizing it, even the cops shows and all these things that I struggle with. We don't do any of that. We have said yes 3 or 4 times in 25 years to specific requests that we spend a lot of time filtering. And so, she's very good at saying no, and that's pretty common that when we get those types of requests. And so, it was not uncommon for a Monday morning and how we're doing. And she stood there and said, hey, blank, blank, blank's happening, blank, blank, blank. And she said, hey, we had a weird request from some British document group wanted to do a documentary about the changing faces in music around the country. And they wanted to come in and do some video in the jail and have a mini concert or have this person come in and perform in the jail or whatever. And she said, and I told him no way. And some guy named Jelly Roll. And I went, what? And so we have this exchange, and she goes, well, we're not doing that. I mean, because it would be very disruptive, and it's not something we would have historically done. But my mind jumped to the story of him on the podcast. And I said, hey, do you know? And I went through and, some of that conversation. And I said, what if we do this? What if we offer them to take him back into the vacant facility? Because the reason she would say no is the disruption in a facility is very complicated. But this is less disruptive. And she wouldn't have known, in fairness to her, she wouldn't have known that the vacant building would mean anything. What I was doing was going, wow, that's the building he was in. What if we take him there? So she and I go back and forth. I've said many times, I'm a pretty decent idea guy. She's really good at making it happen. And so I just kind of turn my head and go back to work. She goes and talks to them. The next thing I know, it's 3 months down the road. And hey, Tuesday, we need to be out in Harding Place. That crew is coming in to do this thing. And this Jelly Roll character is going to be there. Still, no one knew who he was in this town. And I'm talking about, so I'm kind of wired up about it. I thought, let's grab him and go out and meet the guy. So believe it or not, last thing I did walking out of my office, I grabbed a key. And these are keys from the old jail we had torn down downtown. It's just a big looking Folger Adams key, but we engraved it and had the facility on it. And I knew he would have been booked in that jail when he was arrested. That's just has to be. So I took him a key and went out there. I introduced myself. Hey man, I nice to meet you. I grew up out in this area too. I want to give you this, give you this. And he got up and he performs kind of a Johnny Cash type of program for the inmates. So, and it was to me, watching him communicate that I was in that cell, and my life is turning around and I want to be here to try to help you. Watching the men see it through someone who's done it, I don't care what degrees you have, I don't care what trips I go on or where I learn, his ability to move the needle with individuals, I've never seen anything like it. And it's not about the music. It's really not. I mean, they enjoy some of that. It's about the fact that I was sitting where you are. I decided to change my life. He tells them I walked down the hallway, got my GED. I got involved with a program called Men of Valor, which allowed me to have some mentors. So it was my first experience with this individual who I'm now a huge fan of, because the redemption story in his music, whether you're in jail or not, it's about mental health and needs, and it's okay to ask for help. And for that figure he is to be able to say that on stage and openly be emotional when men aren't really good at that, and to say, I need help, I have a therapist, and I want to get off of drugs and stay out of the life of crime. And it's just, he is, you know, I often say, I think after 40 years, I may be most known to be a decent friend of Jelly Roll, and maybe that's okay.
I think it's a great story, but it also is a good reminder on the policy change front, and for folks that want to be catalysts for real meaningful impact in their communities, that diversity in your approach is critical. And oftentimes that comes not from like an overt plan, but if you can set a clear vision for the thing you want to accomplish and then be open to being opportunistic in both political and policy environments and kind of capture that zeitgeist and then take chances on creative opportunities, maybe you'll fall and you'll fail, but you might be able to make that case. But I also think there's a little bit of humor and irony in kind of being in Belgium. Arguably the most kind of notable thing about Belgium in my mind is the waffle maker in our kitchen, which by construction is segmented and has boxes for every little thing. And the idea that you go in to a place that is representing a society in a country that has very specific segmented boxes for the ways in which we treat various societal challenges, to then come out of there with effectively a pancake that lets that syrup run all over the place is really interesting. And I just kind of giggle at a little bit of the irony there. But
that's awesome.
I really, Sheriff Hall, appreciate your time and your candor today. And thank you for your leadership. Your work reminds us that public safety isn't just about law enforcement. It's about empathy and foresight and the courage to challenge systems when they're no longer serving the people that they're meant to protect. Whether you are helping someone to avoid jail for those nonviolent offenses that we talked about, or creating entirely new models for mental health, you've shown over the last several years through your partnerships and your leadership that change is possible. And what I find most interesting is that compassion can really be part of the strategy, that it can be strategic. If you have enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review. It really does help others find the show, and share it with someone else in your network. We've got more amazing guests coming this season, so please subscribe to Catalysts for Change wherever you get your podcasts, or visit us at catalystsforchangepod.com. Thanks again for listening to Catalysts for Change, brought to you in part by the Southern Research Collaborative. Until next time, I'm Adam Lister, and I'll see you soon.